And last week I opined it was to do with Winston Peters and David Seymour having a bit of a mini scrap. It wasn't a Te Pāti Māori scrap, good God no, but a mini scrap. And I said it was time to send both of them to their bedrooms and not give them tea until they come up and shaken out, because the last thing that the coalition needed was anything that looked like instability, and certainly that would be amplified by the government, by the media of the day, who have been antipathetic towards this to a large extent, the centre-right coalition government. I think they're still in shock. It took them months to get over just the shock of having a centre-right coalition government, but will highlight anything they see as division or rancor or any sort of personal slight in the best interests of trying to get the centre-left in at the next election, which is only now, less than a year away. And in the course of that, I said it was to do with the Regulatory Standards Act that the scrap had broken out, because Winston Peters, a week after having voted for it, or the bill as it then was, do you think it's going to become the Act? I'll have to ask our next guest on that one very quickly, when it becomes the Act, said that he would, if elected, revoke the Regulatory Standards Act. I mean, it's one of those things that you can promise all you like. At the end of the day, it sort of draws a policy distinction, if you like, between New Zealand First and, everybody else. But the reality is that, if you're a small party, you only have X amount of influence in coalition negotiations. I can't imagine that the repeal of the Regulatory Standards Act will be one of those. But there you go. And as you know, there was a bit of a scrap consequent. In the course of that editorial, I mentioned that I wasn't a great fan of the RSA myself, in the sense that it just seemed to be creating another layer of bureaucracy. And I'd had that discussion earlier on with someone I think who would have been the earlier architects of this from the New Zealand Initiative, who said, well, yeah, it's true, you can just ignore it, in pretty much the same way that I always used to. And governments ignore the Ministry of Justice when they give advice on something contravening the Bill of Rights Act or various other, Treaty of Waitangi or whatever it might be. And David Seymour texted me and he said, what? And so here he is. And he joins me now to tell me that I'm wrong. And welcome to the show, David. Lovely to have you on.
Yeah, good to see you, Michael. And I agree with your analysis of the mainstream media, that they will distort and misrepresent anything we say if they think it creates an impression of disharmony within the coalition, because frankly, most of them vote left.
Correct.
However, what really astonished me is to see the platform, which was set up to be an alternative to the mainstream media, committing the same sin. I mean, the simple facts are that, it's a Labor Party position to get rid of the Regulatory Standards Act. If that's your position, that's Labor's position. And I would have thought that we'd have the ability to say things under the auspices of free speech, not have to cower and hide our opinions because of what other people will think.
No, but wait on. No,
like
you're misrepresenting.
Taken on the same view that they were set up to oppose.
No. The New Zealand First said that they would oppose the act. They didn't like it, and that they would repeal it if they were to form a coalition at the next government. You then said, well, Winston Peters is aligning himself with Labor, and I read the direct quote, preparing to form some sort of relationship there. Are you saying that didn't happen?
I'm saying that it's actually a logical corollary that you're not going to form a government with acts to try and repeal something we've spent 20 years putting in place. Therefore, it sounds like you want to form a government with Labor.
That's a long bow, I would have thought, David, just quietly. But okay.
Well,
and that's what
other logical possibility is
well
there?
Because there are a lot. Listen, it might be passionate, you might be passionate about this one, but I'm pretty sure that New Zealand First and any other party is probably not going to die in a ditch over the Regulatory Standards Act. They'll have a lot of other things that are far more important, don't you think, when it comes to coalition agreements?
So why raise it?
Well, because it's a point of difference, and because they went. I mean, there will be pieces of legislation that you're currently supporting as the ACT Party that you're not particularly enamoured of, David, as a party or as a person who's leading that party. Surely you will make independent views as to policy that you'll promote in 12 months' time too?
I doubt that we would take a position that was actually the Labor Party's critique of our government.
Sorry, it's not the question I asked you.
Totally, we won't be taking a position that's a Labor Party view of our government and completely incompatible with the people we'd like to be in government with.
Okay. So are you saying that now, because this is escalating it, are you saying that if if New Zealand First take that particular policy to the next election, you can't possibly form a coalition with them after the next election?
Well, we're not going to vote to repeal a piece of law we've spent 20 years working on in order to get rid of the red tape and regulation that's strangling our whole country. I mean, I would have thought that was fairly clear.
Well, I would have thought, as you both know, we both know that when you're a junior partner and you're heading into coalition agreements, you do your best. But I mean, I wouldn't have thought that National would sign up to this either. Would in your world, would it? Do you think?
I'm not even sure what you're asking about. To be honest, Michael, I've made my points there, but you actually had me on to talk about the Regulatory Standards Act itself and why you seem to be sceptical about changing the incentives of politicians so that they don't make so much red tape and regulation. That's what we really need to do here. That's what the
All right.
Regulatory
Well, okay.
Standards Act,
Listen. I mean,
which
if
by the
question
way
nine doesn't work your
got
way,
royal
David, I'm
assent.
sorry about that. But I was going to ask the background as to why we're here. So, but let's move on to that. The principles of
Yeah,
responsible
good.
regulation. There are a series of them, as you know, in the Act. Can I just ask very quickly, when does the bill become law?
Last Tuesday, I think.
Okay, so it's now in place. Who will
Yep,
enact?
and it has a series of commencement dates. One being the 1st of January, and then the later commencement being decided once we've got certain things like the Regulatory Standards Board in place, but no later than the 1st of July.
Right, so you'll have the Regulatory Standards Board, which is a creation of the Act, in place by 1st of July next year, correct?
At the latest, yeah.
Okay, and then its job is to apply the principles of this particular Act to all legislation that comes before Parliament. Is that correct?
That's right. With
Yep.
certain exceptions, such as budget bills. So, this is not about spending, this is about making rules that affect other people's property. And also certain bills related to treaty settlements, which we exempted basically because some people get very upset about that.
All right, so I imagine you lost that one, and then they go, well, okay, yeah, that was the compromise you would have reached in getting this. When I had the New Zealand Initiative on this issue, have been pushing you and supporting you all the way on this particular issue, I asked the question of, yes, but you can ignore these reports from the Regulatory Standards Board, can't you? In exactly the same way that I could ignore the Ministry of Justice when they say something contravenes the Bill of Rights Act. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's worse than that if you think about it. Parliament can ignore a report from a select committee on a bill. Parliament ultimately can vote for anything. So the most important question is what sort of information do they receive and what sort of information are they seen by the public to receive? What the Regulatory Standards Act will mean is that the people making the law know what impacts they're putting on your property, your time, what red tape they're putting on your business, your building of a home. It's all there. They get all the information. And more importantly, they're seen by the public to get all that information. So next time they want to do something like the earthquake laws, which have been devastating to provincial New Zealand, they will get a proper report on what the impacts on ordinary people will be. And they can ignore it if they want it, want to, but they'll be doing that in the full view of the public. And I think that is a major step forward from a scenario where all the incentives for politicians are to be seen as the action man, making the laws and solving the problem, while ignoring all the impacts that people face as a result.
Here's my problem though, and this was why I was having this discussion, well, this view last week. At the end of the day, the government is elected by the people. It is the representative of, chosen democratically. You know that. So the idea that if you decide to go down, particularly a piece of legislation that might be in any way in contravention of this Act or any other, including the Bill of Rights Act is a good example, I would suggest to you that's fine. I mean, you're elected to do that, off you go. What you're saying is, well, this just makes it a little bit clearer that you could go down certain paths and contravene the 6 principles that are in this Act. Is that right?
Well, it means that if you want to violate people's liberties or their property rights, you need to be open about it in a really public way. And so, it's a little bit like the Public Finance Act. I mean, there's nothing to stop the government from wasting money, running big deficits and bankrupting the nation. You can do that if you want to. But what the Public Finance Act ensures that before every election, the state of your fiscal management is made clear to the voters. So it actually enables democracy rather than hinders it.
Does it? Because it seems to me, David, that you've given a certain power as to what's good and what's not in terms of the interpretation of this Act to a group of people who are unelected. And I'm talking particularly about the regulatory board that will come in prior to the 1st of July next year.
Well, you could say the same thing about the Treasury. They prepare the financial statements that are published before the election. But we don't normally think of it that way. We're usually glad that the government's accounts are published so the voters can see if a group of turkeys are bankrupting them. And it's the same with new regulations. We want to see, according to the Regulatory Standards Act, just like the accounts are published according to the Public Finance Act, we want to see what the costs of these laws and regulations are. And we want politicians who put red tape and costs onto us to feel the heat for it.
Okay, no, but again, that makes it just another thing. I mean, the Ministry of Justice do the same thing, as you know, with Bill of Rights Act, if there's a piece of legislation.
Yep.
They do that, as you say. Treasury run the rule over stuff that might have a fiscal implication or an economic implication for the country. This is another tier, is it not, doing the same thing roughly, except in the 6 principles that you've mentioned?
Well, it's the same basic mechanism, but it's a different set of rights. So if you think about the Reserve Bank Act, that protects your currency, or at least it should. If you get a combination like Grant Robertson and Adrian Orr, then nothing can save you, it seems. But generally over the last 35 years, the Reserve Bank Act has protected the dollar from inflation blowouts. You look at the Public Finance Act, again, for the most of the last 35 years we've had it, governments have actually run surpluses or been driven to work back towards surplus over a reasonable time period. So I think that has worked. The Bill of Rights, yep. So we ignored it in the case of the gang patch legislation. Governments have ignored the Bill of Rights. But I can tell you, if there's a discussion in Cabinet or elsewhere and it says, guys, I think we might be breaching the Bill of Rights, it makes people sit up. It changes behaviour over time. What we have never done in this country is recognise that people have rights to property, that when a government makes a law saying this is going to be a significant natural area on your farm, you've got an earthquake strength in your building, you have to fill out this form every day if you want to run a daycare centre. The costs on people's time and the reduction of the value of their property from this regulatory overreach, we've never really tackled that, and I believe it has made us not just a little bit poorer, but billions and billions and billions of dollars poorer year after year. So tackling red tape and actually getting some transparency around that, in my view, it's the most important thing we can do.
Listen, I'm not disagreeing with your intent at all or on the issues that you've risen. It's just that I'm struggling to see how this stops that. Because although you might get a report under Section C, taking of property under this Act, from your independent board, it won't necessarily stop a government doing it anyhow, though, will it? You're just arguing essentially it's a
No,
transparency device.
yeah, I mean that is, and it's. I think part of the reason people are surprised by that is that you've had certain people on the left go absolutely crazy about this. The Labor Party in 2010, when a very similar bill was debated, actually said it had merit. It was a sensible thing to do. If anything, the debate over this bill shows how far politics has drifted to the left, that being transparent about government's impacts on private property is some sort of crazy controversy. It should be the first thing government does is actually protect your right to property from criminals and itself.
Well, it's not just about, I mean, the property is one section, you've got five others there, the rule of law, as you know, liberties, taxes, fees and levies, role of courts, good lawmaking, etc. I'm interested in the role of courts,
Sure.
and that was the other area that legislation should preserve the court's constitutional role of ascertaining the meaning of legislation, and then earlier you say there should be an independent, impartial judiciary. I wish there was. Do you think there is currently an independent, impartial judiciary in New Zealand?
Well, I'm sitting here as a member of the cabinet and a deputy PM. I'm
Oh, I
not going
suppose you
to
can't
say that
offer an
the
opinion on that. Yeah,
jury's
fair enough.
biased, am I?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
all right. You're not allowed to
Interesting
offer an
question,
opinion
though.
on that. Yeah, it is a good question. Yeah, and that's yeah. I mean, the irony of this is that there are aspects of this that I go, oh, well, good luck on that one. But that always in your mind when you were putting this bill together, David, or was it something that was added later on? Because it seems that Parliament's got a right, if the judiciary get it wrong, to be able to intervene and say, no, that's not what we thought. A really good example of this would be the marine bill, the customary rights bill that's just recently been clarified because you think the Supreme Court's got it wrong. That, this almost seems to say that that shouldn't happen.
No, the purpose of including that part is actually to say an ordinary person has a right to a day in court. Some bureaucrat can't make a decision and say, that's it, you've got no right of appeal, you lose your rights. It's really about restraining bureaucrats from making up the law and deciding what your rights are. There's too much of that going on. It frustrates people enormously. That's the real purpose there. I just also just say one thing. You said when I brought this bill together or made it up. I didn't. This actually came out of the Regulatory Standards Task Force. They wrote the bill back in 2009-10, and that was chaired by Graham Scott, the former Treasury Secretary, Bryce Wilkinson, who you probably interviewed, Jack Hodder, KC, and a couple of other economists and lawyers. So if anyone thinks that this is David Seymour's grand creation, it's not. But it's something that I've long supported because, look, we do it for human rights, we do it for currency, with the Reserve Bank Act, we do it with public finances to protect taxpayers, sort of. We need to do it to protect people's rights against red tape and regulation. And that is part of, I guess, finishing four pieces of law that are designed to give New Zealanders transparency in lawmaking and government activity.
Okay, this won't necessarily eradicate red tape, though, will it? All the bureaucratic oversight, or, I mean, can I give you a really good example? The ministry, you're about to reform local government, sorry, in this country, particularly to do with regional councils and their powers, etc. The new legislation will still be required to be interpreted by public servants, yes? And the way in which those public servants interpret it is often more important than the legislation itself. Now, that's been a real problem in terms of resource management law in this country. Will this deal with that, David?
Well, what it will do is ensure that you've actually got a set of principles you can point to. You can actually say to people, look, Parliament passed a law. It says this is the point of regulating, and these are some of the rights that New Zealanders are supposed to have. So, nobody thinks that this is going to be an overnight revolution, but it will be, in my view, a long, slow revolution where the basic rights of New Zealanders to own property, to use their property, to buy and sell property, to do business, those rights will be given more prominence in our political debate, and that over time will shift us to a society that's more respectful. And when I say respectful, here's what I mean by that. Normally, if you want something, you shouldn't take it. You should actually work out, what can I give that person so they give me what they want. That's how civilized people behave. At the moment, too often, a group of people want something, they ask the government to pass a law to give them what they want at someone else's expense. That's what we're trying to get rid of. We're trying to make this a respectful society where if people want something from someone else, they've actually got to do a mutually agreeable deal.
Is the Fiscal Responsibility Act that Ruth Richardson set up in 1994, is that the kind of place that you want this bill to have in the future?
Absolutely. I didn't mention the Fiscal Responsibility Act earlier because it got merged into the Public Finance Act. But you're right to credit Ruth with this, and what she did, I think, for example, got rid of Helen Clark, because I remember in 2008 when they were forced to open the books right before the election, and that's when it was, to me, that's when it was clearly over. I think when you have a mandatory publishing of the books before every election and two other times per year, you really change the way politicians think and behave. And I want to do that with politicians who make red tape and regulation just the same way that the Fiscal Responsibility Act did it to politicians who waste your taxes.
Okay. The legislation can still be put aside, though. I mean, I'm just clarifying that by a government of the day, it will get the report from the bill. It'll say, yes, thank you very much for your input. But if it wishes to, it can ignore it and just carry on its own path, yes?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's why I'm asking, do you really think, I mean, the Bill of Rights Act and the gang patch legislation is a classic one for me, where the government said, mm, at the end of the day, that's not as important as what we're doing. Do you do you think that this will, I mean, and you've said earlier in this conversation, you think this will alter behaviour? Alter behaviour of who? Lawmakers or bureaucrats or both?
Both and the voters. So if you look at the gang patch ban, there was a strong political will to make it happen.
Hmm.
But the difference that the Bill of Rights has made is we at least live in a society where we acknowledge that there was a breach of people's fundamental rights. Now, I would rather, if I'm going to live in any society and one of them acknowledges these things and the other one doesn't, the one that acknowledges it is in a much better place than the one that doesn't. Because if you're a despot or a dictator or a bad person, one of the first things you do is you try and take away the voice of the people that you're trying to dominate. These pieces of law do is they actually change the conversation. It's still a political debate. People still do and get away with bad things. We know all that. But it means that there's acknowledgement, and that creates the impetus to change the way we do things. And that, I think, is actually very much worthwhile.
The principles apply, Section 9, to do with the legislation. So all law, is it all government bills, must ensure that the
Uh,
bill is meeting this particular act. So that there isn't a piece of legislation or an amending piece of legislation, it would appear, that doesn't need to be consistent with this particular Regulatory Standards Act. Is that correct? So that's an awful lot of work you would expect.
well, I'd expect so, but I mean, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, there's some bills that are exempt. Second of all bills at the moment are supposed to have regulatory impact statements. It's just that they don't have clear principles. No one pays them any attention. They take up huge amounts of resource. They're usually written after all the decisions are made to justify the decisions. We're going to largely get rid of those statements. So we're going to remove a lot of bureaucracy. We're going to save a lot of money doing that. And then we're going to say, yes, you've got to do these consistency accountability statements in line with the principles that Parliament has legislated to look after people's rights, or at least acknowledge if there are any breaches of people's rights. That, I think, is an enormous breakthrough, and it will be paid for in large part, if not completely, by removing the current bureaucratic processes which have had zero effect.
The board itself that's going to be established, I assume, well, obviously it's going to be appointed by the government of the day. Um, those, what sort of skill sets are you looking for to go on there? Are they going to be lawyers? Are they going to be accountants? Are they going to be business people? What sort of people do you
Well,
think?
I'd want experience of people who've practically run a business, so they actually know not what it sounds like according to the bureaucrats, but what it's like when you get the letter from the regulator saying, here's another thing you've got to do. I'd also want people with some experience in regulatory economics so they actually understand, they have a framework for thinking about when governments should and shouldn't make rules and who should pay the costs and who should get the benefits and so on. And you'd also want some people with some legal experience. So, look, some practical business experience, some economics, and some law would be exactly right.
Okay, and the bureaucracy that to support them. Um, have you established that already, or is that yet to be?
Well, the Ministry for Regulation is a small but mighty ministry. It has a total of, I think, 89 people in it. So it is a very small fraction of the overall public service. But to have one department among 46, you've got 45 others that are making laws and regulations. You've got one that's actually representing the rest of us.
So you aren't anticipating any further need to employ staff to support the bill or the act, sorry.
No,
Okay. All right. Okay. What are you doing for the rest of today? You've got an announcement to do with local government
I'm
today. Have you had an input into that?
well. I have. I'm part of cabinet, and I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot of people who very frustrated with regional government, but I should leave it up to the minister responsible to make the rest of the announcement.
When do you
I'm
expect that
also now
statement to be
five
made?
minute. I think I think it comes out at 5 p.m. But
Oh, okay.
I could be wrong about that. I know I'm 5 minutes late to talk to the Manawatu
Okay.
Business Chamber, so I better get going.
Thank you very much, David
Thanks, Michael.
Seymour. Nice to talk to you, ACT Party leader on the Regulatory Standards Act. Good to hear that people are listening to us, but there you go. You'll make up your own minds as to whether or not, I guess we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding. The Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1994 was introduced by Ruth Richardson. It was probably her enduring. I didn't realise it had been picked up by the Public Finance Act, but I guess it would have. Um, but it was her enduring legacy. Obviously, David Seymour obviously hopes that this will have the same role. Will it? We will see. Yes, will it be changed by successive governments coming through? We will see. Will they add the Treaty of Waitangi to it? Oh, yes. You can bet your bottom dollar it will happen one day.